This film, the 50s, was put together from 16 millimeter movie film in 1988. Now, 1993, I, Adelaide Best, aged 81, am adding the audio to it with the great assistance of Steve and Linda Best. We are finding as we go through one tape after another that there's a certain amount on this tape of duplication of what we had on the tape called the 40s. But be that as it may, and we will just keep showing it. I must confess that I get a little mixed up as to who is how old when. And now, since all of these small fry are pushing 50, it seems irrelevant. They were all cute little dinks having a perfectly marvelous time, particularly the fact that there were 4 of them together to get into trouble. This is Steve. That is Richard Best and Steve Best again. I think we must be approaching Dick Best's 2nd birthday, which of course took place July 30th, 1949. That is Cindy Best, who is 8 years older than Dick. And Judy Conant, who was 3 years younger than Cindy. I think this birthday party is taking place. That is Alva, who was our sitter that year, from Hammond. Having brought sitters from home a couple of times, we thought we would try having a local girl who could at least have a home to go to on her days off. There is Richard, age 2. I think we're settling outside the big house in the shade, not too far from the kitchen for this birthday celebration. There's the cake. I remember one year we asked Dick what color he wanted his frosting, and he said blue, and people could hardly bear to eat it because blue cake was it was the wrong color. But of course, at this point, he hadn't expressed a preference. These caps were purchased at Alexandria Bay on some kind of an expedition. I guess Richard was too young to get one, but they were worn proudly by everybody for one entire summer. Well, everybody's carrying fishing rods. Oh, this? And they wore them on the Hammond Firemen's Field Day Parade. This car, and I don't know whose it was, I think was meant to be a large boat because everybody was fishing from it. I wonder here we're back at the parade. Here comes our entry. See the fish hanging over the side or being caught? Well, the parade is nothing to write home about, but it was quite an event in an otherwise very placid summer. And for the town of Hammond, I think population maybe 5,000, was a pretty big day. The bikes were marvelous. This marvelous little boathouse docking area was made by Don Best, and those poles at the 4 corners went through holes in the floating part of the dock, and so we could plunk it anywhere in the sand and it would stay there. This was part of the regatta. One of the events was for the older gentleman to choose a lady and dress her in newspapers with a prize for the most attractive costume. They were given newspapers and pins. Ruth Hathaway, I think, won. I don't know who dressed her, but it was a novel event. It was something different, because regattas do tend to be rather alike. Now there is Mrs. Quarrier looking, as usual, with her hat, and Leisha Quarrier, her daughter-in-law, and then a Chapman lady. Yes. I think the gentlemen who dressed them are standing. Oh, that was old Mr. Bailey that dressed the winning number. There again is Tommy Jones. It seems as though we took most of the pictures when the Jones family were visiting. Who is that with, Steve? I guess this is the end of the peanut scramble. Yes, it looks as though maybe Pat won, or came close to it. I don't know. That is Jamie, yes. In those days, that little boy's hair was kept short. Not quite. This was not yet the crew cut time, but it was kept shorter than little boys wear their hair nowadays. This is Don Best, I believe, being rowed by Judy, Cindy in the bow. The boys had endless fun pushing boats around through the water and tying them up, because it was supposed to be the same number of slips as our own boathouse. It lasted for many, many years, being taken in every winter. I used to wonder whether it would ever survive another period. That's Archie, and who is that big boy? He keeps appearing, and I can't remember who he is. Nor do I remember where we got this thing, this inflatable thing. But it was very popular one summer. This was the year that they were known as the Terrible Twos, Steve and Pat. They pushed threw chairs in off the dock from the beginning of the summer to the end. We were rather glad when they got through being two, and the next year were three. Well, of course, that's quite an achievement to make a somersault off of the mat. That is Hugh Jones, father of all the Jones children, husband of my dearest college friend. They came up from just outside Utica, an easy drive up, and generally spent a week with us every summer. Oh, Hugh, in later life, was a member of the Appellate Court of New York State, an eminent jurist. He has also been extremely active as, I don't know, not controller, but something in the Episcopal Church, on the national board of it. There is me. I don't know. Oh, Jean is in the chair. And here, at long last, Uncle Jim has found himself a... No, is that it? No, that isn't Uncle Jim. Oh, that's on the other tape. Excuse me. Erase that. I'm not just sure who that was. Jay and Tommy Jones, struggling for possession of the ladder. I think it must have been at this time that we had all the little boys up on the third floor of the big house, general dormitory, plus one other bedroom. We could sleep 5 kids up there. This looks like a very exciting afternoon's progression. I think Steve is pulling the whole shebang. Jay is manning the ropes. I'm not sure who is prone on the mat. Must be Cynthia, and then comes Judy. Did we have Uncle Jim somewhere in this? Let us see. Well, yes, Uncle Jim is almost submerged under people sitting on his head and his back. That looks like Aunt Si. And this is, well, it's aquaplaning. I can't quite tell whether it's aquaplaning on a shutter, as we used to do, or whether we have now purchased a bona fide aquaplane. I think it's a bona fide aquaplane. And that is Cindy. I think Judy is driving the boat. I believe I am riding along in case. That's Ann and Jay Talcott were sitting there. Jay has gone. That's Judy. I believe. I recognize the bathing suit from an earlier picture. This, again, was a very momentous occasion. This is the beginning of laying the cable for shore electricity. Prior to this time, people from shore out as far as the Quarriers, which was the first row of islands as it were, had connections to the shore for their electricity. Then some of us, a little bit further out, decided that we would undertake to bring the cable from the Quarriers to Panema, and from there it could be subcontracted out to various people on Cedar Island. So someone made an estimate of how many feet of cable would be needed. It had to be carefully laid on this scow and then pulled slowly out from Quarriers to Panema, being paid out gradually as it went along. Well, no one was exactly sure what the bottom was like or whether enough cable had been ordered. Would it reach? We simply started and hoped for the best. The idea was that we would, Conant and Best, would purchase the cable, have it installed, and then ultimately we just had to give it to Niagara Mohawk. They never paid us for it, but they took over the care, the upkeep, the repair, the use, and so forth. Well, we were still awfully glad to get shore electricity, because prior to that we had had a Delco system with batteries, which had had to be replaced once since 1938. But we hoped with electricity we could then go from direct current to alternating current. We could have honest-to-gosh refrigerator, washing machine, toaster, iron, which we had never had before. Fortunately, it was a very calm day. We had prayed for that. And here they are, kind of midway out over to Panema, paying out the cable. Well, they hit a low spot, an extra deep spot, which made everybody very nervous because it had used up more cable to go, because of course the cable's lying on the bottom, and it took more to go down and come up. And here we are approaching Panema. Will it reach? It was getting to be very little left. It was supposed to come over up the dock and onto land and over to the little pump house which had held the Delco pump and batteries. Unfortunately, it didn't. But it did make it onto shore to a spot just behind Panema's main dock. You can see it was pretty big, heavy cable. So a pump house, stone pump house, was built right there, and we very soon got used to it. It became covered with ivy. Here is Uncle Luke, Bill Lucas, up for another visit from Evanston, Illinois, with the Lucas girls, Barbara, or is that Charlotte? Looks like Charlotte. Barbara standing. No, that's Cindy. Oh, I can't tell who is who at this point. I sometimes wonder all this conversation Dick is giving us. I don't know what it's all about. There is Aunt Mary and Uncle Luke. And HR, the last picture of HR and Cindy, I think they refuse to have their picture taken together anymore. HR continued on to Hamilton College and Harvard Law School and joined one of the best firms in Boston, married a Boston girl, and is, as of today, is a very successful, very conservative Boston lawyer with 3 or 4 children. Cindy, as most of you know, was divorced from Jim Lew, the father of her 3 girls, long about, long about in the 60s somewhere. 1970? 69. Well, 69 or 70. Her girls now are, Anne is in the Army and married, living in California. Jennifer is still single, out in Portland. And Cricket is the mother of 2 darling little girls down in Louisiana. I never minded becoming a grandmother myself, but it seemed very strange when my daughter became a grandmother. There is the cruiser in full color. No, it's at our dock. I think that belonged to the people who lived over on shore. What was their name? Oh, yes, you know. The Bacchuses. The Bacchus. I think this is belonged to the Bacchus family. And there is Don Best riding on something that was known as the Uncle Jim. It was a gift from Uncle Jim to all his nieces and nephews, a water bicycle. And it was an awkward thing to tie up or to dock, but it was a great deal of pleasure, gave a great deal of pleasure. At one point, Cy rode it all the way over to Cocktails at, these names escape me, not the Woods, but the Bob Woods. Owatonna, yes. Amid cheers from on her arrival. Yeah, a certain.
I could only hope she was towed back. It was a lot of fun, but it was real inefficient. You had to work real hard, especially if your legs aren't too long.
Don Best and Sam, Cy, Cynthia, and Judy. What are we watching? Well, we're watching Steve trying to make the water cycle go.
A little help in the back.
A little help in the back from Pat Conant, I think, is doing the trick. And there is Adelaide helping I suppose, Dick make it go or something. Maybe he's helping Steve make it go. This was another favorite sport of the boys, playing around on the roof of the boathouse. I don't think that is any person being raised up. I'm not just sure what it is. I was told that the roof got very hot, and it was very hard on your feet unless you could stand on a beach towel. Obviously, you couldn't sit there without sitting on a beach towel. Makes an interesting picture, at least. It doesn't seem as though they jumped off very much. Mostly they just ran around with a view from higher up. And there is a sailfish. That was another investment we made, which was very good. A marvelous way to teach kids how to sail. Because, of course, you tripped over quite often, but you got it yourself upright almost as easily. And there was always something to hang on if you did turn over. And you got the feel of sailing very fast. I think that's Jay and Tommy on this one. Tommy is now principal, or has been for some years, or maybe he's superintendent of schools in the town in New Jersey where he lives. Yes, here is Uncle Jim finally with a fiancée, Petey. They celebrated their 50th anniversary, wedding anniversary not so long ago. They have 3 very successful children, a son and 2 daughters. And Petey and Jim still live in only the 2nd house in Evanston, in Winnetka, which they have ever had in all their married life. Goodness, such energy. This is Brown Ledge Camp on Mallett's Bay and Lake Champlain, Vermont, just north of Burlington. Cindy went there, I think the summer she was perhaps 14, and on recommendation from friends at home, and it proved to be a very good choice. She enjoyed water skiing, sailing, and horseback riding. Eventually sent a daughter of hers there, and we recommended to yet the daughter of another friend. It was within a convenient distance from the island for picking up at the end of the season, and I think a very well-run camp. I'm not sure whether we went to visit or whether this was, it must have been just not the end of season, it must have been just watching. they sailed this kind of little boat. A lovely spot. Although Cindy found the riding less exciting than she had hoped. It was all ring riding, and she had hoped to get out into the woods. But it didn't happen. You wonder when we had the island why we sent children to camp? Well, because we felt that the discipline of camp would be a good thing. While they swam a lot, they never learned the proper way, proper strokes for swimming. While they sailed and rowed and did all that, there was no competition, no form, no style to it. And particularly with Cindy, when you lived, she didn't have a lot of intimate friends her own age of a summer. There is Dick painting the doghouse, in which no dog ever slept, but it was a project apparently that was thought up for him to do. Steve called my attention to the studded belt. Everything was very Western in those days. And the boys had Western shirts and cowboy hats to play in and that sort of thing. This, I was talking about, this is when the Getha went on a shoal, which Sam for years had maintained was non-existent. I was sure there was a shoal there, and I was vindicated ultimately when the Getha got stuck on it. I was talking about sending the kids to camp. Cindy gained a lot from going to her camp, having a camp experience. We sent Jamie to Adirondack Woodcraft, which I will show you later in the film, simply because he was being too bossy, too overwhelming to the three younger boys. And we felt that a summer without Jay would be pleasanter. And I believe the boys concurred.
You bet we did.
This is a Conant dog. I think one day everybody decided they'd row around the island, which they were, of course, allowed to do. That looks like Uncle Don in a motorboat. And here come three rowers. Three, or is it four? There was a rule about lifeys that you had to wear a lifey in a boat until you could swim a given distance without it. Do you remember how far the distance was, Steve?
Yeah, it was between the two docks, Conan's docks to the Tamagami dock.
There is Steve in the 1000 TI skiff. The other boys are in the punts. We had two. The Conants had one, we had one, built along the same lines. It looks as though Dick is out in a dinghy. Well, we figured it was awfully good exercise anyway.
There's a guy wire on the left there, diagonally. That was put there when one of the pine trees fell on the house, almost on the house. Almost on the house during a big storm, and was then guyed back. The tree finally went when the house burned, but the wire and the anchor can still be seen there on that part of the rock.
When it first came loose from the rock was a pretty exciting thing. It was way back in '33, and I had my roommate from my graduate year at University of Michigan up. And I was telling her about describing a white squall, how you could watch it coming all the way from Canada, the wall of white. She said, "Oh, I'd love to see a white squall." Whereupon one started. And it was a big white squall because it came and it came and it came. And then the trees started blowing, and we watched this tree just come toward the house. As we were sitting in the dining room window seat, watching it come practically toward us. Darn fools that we were, we didn't ever thought of running. Fortunately, something stopped it. It came within literally a foot or two of the house, and as Steve had pointed out, it was then guyed up with a strong cable to the rock. This is Adirondack Woodcraft Camp, where we sent Jay because the Wood Boys had gone there the previous year. It was just down in the Adirondacks. Only took us about 2.5 hours to get there. We went in toward Old Forge. We were there when camp was just about over in order to bring Jay home. But it appeared to have all the appurtenances of a regular good camp for evening campfire, etc., etc. And I guess Jay had a good enough time. He never talked about wanting to go back, but he had had some craft training and a certain amount of discipline, and we felt that it was good for him to get away from the family then.
And he came back with, I don't know how many of these little lanyards made of little, vinyl stuff, strips that you weave into something for holding whistles and stuff. You remember those? No. Everybody goes to camp makes lanyards.
Oh, well, it's the first craft project, huh? Available. I mean, anyone is capable of it. This, I think, was the dining hall or some community place. I wonder if it's still there. The camp that I went to when I was 13 or 14 up in Maine, believe it or not, is still going. Just a very few years. Oh, well, I can't tell you about that camp, but it is still there, and I went to see it. I passed through Wilton, Maine, where bass shoes are made, and I thought, I wonder if Kineawatha Camp is still here. Sure enough, it was. Looked exactly like when I had been there 50 years before, except the trees were taller. This is the new Tomogamy 7. As Steve said, the station wagon is compared to the sedan. It was built by Hutchinson up at the bay with a Chrysler something or other motor. Built more or less to our specifications, so we were very pleased to have it. There goes Cindy.
This float, the first of many floats, looks like some kind of World War II surplus thing. Of course, there was a lot of that around in those years. Now, as she comes in, of course, the trick, if you've ever done this, the water's kind of cold up there, at least us Southerners, and the trick is to let go of the rope and coast to a stop, perfectly right, so that you can put your rear right on the, and she doesn't make it, and she gets wet. Missed it.
Now we'll have somebody else taking a turn.
The boat you just saw going out was the Little Cedar, which was owned by the folks across the bay. We always, in my time, Mom called them the Closses or Closses Point, but I guess they rent. Oh, they were only renters. Okay, well, their place burned in '61, 2 years before our big house.
They said it was an overheated chimney. They built too big a fire in the old chimney, and of course everything up there is made of wood, so it went fast. Oh, there's Judy. She made it a little bit closer than Cindy did. This is going up to Ironsides to see the herons' nests, the great blue herons. They built many, many nests very close together, and year after year after year. And we always tried to go up in early July when the fledglings were big enough to be seen, but just before they really left the nest. The adult birds fed and all up and down. We used to see them often at Temagami. And it was quite an interesting expedition because the birds, there were so many of them that their droppings had killed all the vegetation at the foot of the trees. And you came upon this rather ghostly area in the middle of what was a heavily forested island with all these great nests high up. One year, some hunters went in and shot all the birds, so that for several years after that, we had no more herons up there. Seemed a stupid thing to do. The approach was rather hazardous. You had to kind of tie up the boat along a rather steep bank and then somehow manage to scramble up it. We insisted upon taking Grandma Greaveswalker there because she was a great bird lover. And here she is trying to make her way back down to the boat, which I guess she did, in spite of falling down or so. She didn't really hurt herself. Now we suddenly shift back to Peoria, Illinois, where one spring Cy brought young Pat out for a visit. I forget, they had quite a trip. They went to some caverns and all kinds of things. But at any rate, the boys thoroughly enjoyed showing Peoria to their cousin Pat. And they had a wonderful tour of the Caterpillar tractor factory. And a wonderful picture taken of all of them then. Steve, did you say there was something, one of these is your new bicycle? Or not one of these? No. Oh, back at the island on the water bicycle, on the Uncle Jim. I don't know who that is. But you can see the legs are getting longer.
Well, that sailboat in the background was a fiberglass sailboat. It was a Rebel class. I think we bought it at a boat show. It was the only one up there, and it never really sailed all that well, as I recall. But it was our last stab at having a real sailboat to learn in. And after that, we all did sailfishes and later sunfishes, as you see here. Here, it's the younger guys going for a paddle around the island, or at least up the little channel between Panema and Temagami. I think that's me, Steve, getting over the bridge rather than under because I knew that there are these large dock spiders, 2 inches around at least, who live underneath that bridge, and there was no way I was going to go underneath the bridge.
The girls on the sailfish were the Nesbit girls, Francie and Mimi, who came up from time to time with their mother from Clinton, New York, down near Utica. These are fish apparently caught by Sam and Don. It seems extraordinary because I had not recalled that Don Best ever caught any fish, but he obviously did here. So it's a pretty good catch, I guess. I don't think they went fishing very often, and certainly not together. I think they must have hired a guide and gone out and gotten these. And this is, what car did you say, Steve, this is?
This is a fabulous 1957 Dodge that we got in. This is Mom's car that we got. Look at those tail fins. Oh, was this a great car to drive it? Look at Jay understands just how to behave with a car like that. What a dreamboat. We got it in Peoria and we drove it up the island, of course, and it was,
I'm not just sure what this building is, but I think I saw it in the background somewhere near where the new St. Paul's Cathedral was going to be built. But at any rate, another family picture. And there is Adelaide again, by the wonderful new car, of which I have absolutely no recollection. A Nash, you say, Steve?
No, it was a Dodge. It pays to be 11, 12 years old, and when it comes to cars, you notice them more than you do, I think, later.
Right. Right. Oh, and this is the Wizard.
Yeah, we boys had wanted front wheel steering for years, and finally it was, if you guys pay for it, you can put it in. And that year we'd splurged and bought the fanciest Atwood steering wheel you could get, and there we were putting the cables in to make it a front wheel steering thing. Never got the money to get the windshield on it, but there we are.
I think this large craft belonged to some rich friends of the Conants. We had mixed emotions about visiting cruiser friends. They always wanted to entertain us with martinis or something in their hot little boats, ships, vessels. Whereas we would think that we were doing them a favor to invite them up to our cool porch for a lovely, cool cocktail hour. There goes the Larson. This is called the Franceline from, I don't know, I can't see. Well, the Conants would know who they are.
We kids did not have any such mixed emotions about these cruisers. That when they occasionally arrived, these were the neatest things to happen all summer. And an invitation to go aboard was never turned down. The boat, the Larson, was new in 1958, bought it off the floor of the Chicago Boat Show, and skiing behind it was a whole lot easier than behind the Temagami. The Temagami threw an enormous wake, the more so because we were small, but this boat was quite possible. Who are these folks, Mom?
I have no idea. They must be friends of Cindy's or something. Don't know where they came from. I always thought these next few feet of movie film showed something really spectacular. We are proudly showing off our collection of power boats. There goes the Temagami 7th with Jay at the wheel. Here comes the Larson with Steve at the wheel. And last but not least, the Wizard with Richard at the wheel. As you can see, we never did get the windshield, but that little boat, it's a fiberglass boat we bought from the Chicago Boat Show, untried out, the first year that they had fiberglass boats. And it is now 40 years old and still going. Although the first year people said, "You're crazy, it'll never last." But it has.
Before it, you caught a glimpse of it. We had a molded plywood boat called the Whirlwind. We always named them after the brand of the thing. Very unimaginative. But we always tended to get in those years, the new technology thing. Molded plywood didn't really turn out to be the answer to boats that we thought at the time, but fiberglass did.
I've always been rather proud to think that I grew up handling boats and driving boats and being familiar with the water, and I'm glad my boys always had that experience too. That is Mimi Kingsley in the front, and I think some of Jay's friends from Cranbrook School in the background. And Richard on the roof. Richard, taking pictures of somebody? Oh, of the boats. I see. Yes.
It was a bird's eye view of the new boat, like you might see in an advertising brochure, looking down with the seat folded down and someone showing how you could lie down on the folded down seat. A new feature, certainly.
The Larson has held up quite well, considering it's had a lot of rough treatment. It's had the seats redone and so forth. Now, here we are in 1962 with small Cricket Lou, born on April 1st, so she's pretty, and Ann Jones and her husband, Ann Jones McHugh and her husband, who is Cricket's godmother and Cindy's good friend. Yes. That is Tom McHugh, a doctor now, up at Calais, Maine, right on the Canadian border. That is Tony Menkel. And it gives us a certain amount of pleasure to know that he and Claire now own, and their children supposedly own Tomogamy, which is where he started out as a child. We were happy to sell to them rather than to strangers. Tony and Don Best. Who are those children? Oh, young Menkel. Yes, Tony, one of Tony's children. And there is Claire, Tony's wife, playing with Howard Wood. And who is he playing with? Oh. And this is our stalwart Steve.
This is the famous walk down to Hollykai. After the big house burned, and Mom put a kitchen and stuff in the old workshop, we had occasion to walk down this way, and it was muddy and slippery, and so I decided we needed a concrete walk. Well, what I know about concrete work you're about to see, which isn't much. So I went down to the bay and got about 4 bags of saccrete and a bunch of rocks, and decided I would just make a little path. I think it turned out to need about 3 times that much saccrete, and it's just a little river. It has stood up well over the years, and I had great pleasure doing it, and such as it is my legacy for the place. I took a trowel and made it really smooth the first time, and then found it was so slippery in the wet that I had to go over and borrow a grinder and grind a roughness into the surface. And there it be.